Hello. It's my pleasure to introduce you to the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment, or DORA. My name is Stephen Curry, and I'm a professor of structural biology and the Assistant Provost for Equality, Diversity and Inclusion at Imperial College in London. I also have the privilege of being chair of the DORA steering group. So DORA, the declaration, dates from about late 2012 and was an initiative and a declaration written by a group of editors and publishers of scholarly journals, primarily from the cell and molecular biology disciplines, which was aiming to address the problems that we have from our undue reliance on metrics in research assessment. It is perhaps best known for being critical of the misuse of the journal impact factor in the assessment both of individual research articles, but also in the assessment of the endeavours of individual researchers themselves. So it's perhaps best known for being critical of the impact factor, but in fact the declaration goes beyond this very first paragraph and runs for another 2 or 3 pages and has 17 positive recommendations for an array of stakeholders in the academic landscape. And that includes funders, publishers, data providers, research institutions and universities, and researchers themselves. The particular recommendations for funders, who I know are represented very heavily here at this meeting, focus twofold. Firstly, on having explicit criteria for what counts as high quality research and placing an emphasis on the content of an academic paper rather than the publication venue or any publication metrics associated with it in your assessment of its quality. And secondly, we want to make sure that actually research assessment embraces all the important and valuable activities that academics and researchers undertake. So not just publishing research articles, which has tended to be the focus of late, but thinking about other outputs, such as sharing data sets and software and reagents, other contributions, training PhD students and young researchers, and other contributions to research that has real-world impact or research that changes policy or practice. And so we want a much broader basis for our conversations about what constitutes high-quality research. So as well as being a declaration, DORA is now also an organisation. The declaration itself was published in May 2013 and has now accrued over 16,000 individual signatories as well as over 2,000 organisational signatories. In 2017, the initiative got a significant boost and reinvigoration thanks to financial support from a number of supporting organisations who are listed on this slide. And that has enabled us to hire a small staff, so we now have 1.2 FTEs or full-time equivalents, plus 1 intern. And even with that small staff, that has allowed us to make a real step change in the level of activity that DORA can pursue, both in raising awareness about the need for responsible research assessment, which is the topic of this conference, but also helping and working with others to think through new tools for advancing that agenda. At the same time, we reconstituted our steering committee, and it is international, although it is focused with European and North American representation. However, we recognise that because research and scholarship is fully international, then the problem of reforming research assessment has to be a fully international endeavour. So we have also constituted an international advisory board that is truly global and contains representatives from every single continent on the globe. So with our new funding and our reinvigorated purpose, we have outlined a roadmap for DORA, and that has 3 principal elements. The first is to gather more signatures, which is about raising awareness and sparking new conversations about the need for reform and the problem of the misuse of incentives that are too metrics based. We're also looking to expand the global and disciplinary reach of DORA. It's very much rooted in the sciences, although in the sciences and in particular in biomedical sciences, I think it can be argued that there is a particular obsession with metrics. But we know that the metricization of scholarship pervades all disciplines, and there are issues in the arts, humanities and social sciences, for example, and we are looking to have dialogue with those communities and to advance those conversations. We're also, as seen in the motivation to constitute our advisory board, looking to spark worldwide conversations, and that's why we're particularly pleased to be participating in this meeting. And then the third and final one, which I think is the most important one, is our commitment to discover and promote new tools for good practice in research assessment. And so we have been much more proactive about organising workshops and meetings to not just discuss the problem, but to actually think through how we overcome those problems and how we develop solutions. And so we have been working with many different communities and organisations to think about new tools and practices. And I'm just going to mention a couple of those. So one example is a meeting that we convened in North America last year in October 2019, jointly with the Howard Hughes Medical Institution, and that was primarily aimed to examine the barriers to institutional cultural change. We know that, particularly I think for research institutes and for universities where researchers and scholars live and have their being, the pressures that they face in terms of employment and the external pressures from metrics, from university league tables, mean that we all too easily fall back into old and bad behaviours, and we do really need to do the hard work of thinking through new solutions and working together as communities within those institutions. But of course also it's important for institutions to collaborate with one another, because I don't think anybody has figured out the answer to this yet, and this meeting is yet one more opportunity to have dialogue about what are really workable solutions. So the summary of the deliberations of that meeting and a sort of scoping of examples of good practice from around the world was written up and published in this paper in eLife, which appeared in the summer this year. One other area where we have been working with other organisations is in the development of new tools and policies. This is one example. We were consulted by the Royal Society in the UK on the development of a narrative CV form that is used, can be used in research and researcher assessment. So this is a way of replacing the long lists of bibliographies, which are often accompanied by the journal impact factors in people's CVs, and it's a way of providing a structured narrative that gives access to much more qualitative information about particular contributions and can also then speak to the breadth of activities that we are looking to value. Not just high quality research and high quality publications, which is of course important, but things like one's commitment to open science, commitment to collaboration, commitment to policy engagement, commitment to mentorship. Another organisation we have worked closely with is the Wellcome Trust in the UK, who are a strong supporter of DORA in helping to inform their open access and funding policies. And so they now have a very strong policy which requires applicants for funding to be working at institutions that have either signed DORA or have implemented reforms to research assessment that are consistent with the DORA principles. We've also developed new tools for research assessment, and here is just one example. This is work done in collaboration with Ruth Schmidt and is developing short one-page briefings debunking myths and helping people to think through biases that we hope will stimulate conversations at many institutions. So DORA is a declaration, but ultimately declarations become fixed in time. One of the issues we have dealing with a number of organisations that have either signed or are thinking of signing is that we find they tend sometimes to obsess a little bit about the wording of the declaration, and in those conversations we would always emphasize the importance of the spirit of the declaration. Think about what it is we are trying to achieve in terms of implementing and introducing robust good practices around research assessment that incentivize the very best behaviours and the very best results in terms of research output. So I particularly have a personal philosophy about what research excellence looks like, which is encoded here on or written here on the slide. And our emphasis at DORA would always be that actions are far more important than words. And I hope that that will form part of the words that we share and discuss at this meeting. One final thing I want to mention is that the work that we are doing at DORA and the work that many other organisations are doing to reform research assessment is obviously taking place within a much larger conversation around the world and within academia. And the major elements of that are thinking about how to advance open scholarship, and then also thinking about how to make sure that the academy is truly inclusive. In too many countries, and the UK I would include in that, the demographics within the academy do not fully represent the demographics of the societies that we are aiming to serve. And that's a problem, and it's a problem that's related to research assessment, because I think sometimes we fall back on stereotypical ideas of what a good researcher looks like, and we need to challenge those biases if we are going to develop a truly vigorous research ecosystem. So with that, I will thank you for your attention, and I look forward to the discussions at the meeting to come.
Hello, I'm Rebecca Kaiser. I'm the head of the Office of International Science and Engineering at the U.S. National Science Foundation. And I'm here to talk to you about the Global Research Council Merit Review Principles. I'll tell you a bit about their history and their content, and a little bit more about why we have these principles at all. These principles were first proposed at the very first Global Research Council Global Summit, which was in 2012, and it was focused on merit review. We shared information, and international partners shared with us best practices, principles, and thoughts about merit review and how we select and fund the best possible research. These principles were revised in 2018 to reflect the evolving nature of the global research enterprise. These principles assure that government funding is being properly allocated. We all around the world want to be best stewards of public funding and make sure that it does go to the best science possible. The principles provide agreement and a global standard on the review principles to also foster international cooperation among research funding agencies. We take this to heart, and the Global Research Council currently has more than 60 research councils and funding agencies that are part of it. And the principles have an important role in research support and management worldwide. The overall principles of merit review involve expert assessment. They involve transparency, impartiality, appropriateness, meaning the appropriateness of the research. We need to make sure that the proposals are confidential until our researchers are ready to make the information and data that we fund public. And we do need to take into account integrity and ethical considerations, as well as what was added in 2018, extremely important, gender equality and diversity. As part of the principles of merit review, reviewers must be selected using clear criteria. We need to select the reviewers that have the appropriate knowledge and expertise to assess the proposal, both the broad context of the research fields, as well as the specific objectives and methodology. The expertise of the reviewers is key. And review techniques must consider the potential impact of suggested research. Dr. Panchanathan the director of the National Science Foundation, will talk to you about how the National Science Foundation does this specifically. And I'm talking to you about the overall principles that we share in common across the globe in merit review. Also, decisions need to be made using clear rules, procedures, and assessment criteria. So we need transparency in the process. And so we need to make sure that we publish our process in advance, how we're going to make these decisions. The proposals must be treated equally. We must try to remove as much bias as possible. And appropriate feedback should be provided to all applicants, those whose proposals are funded and those whose proposals are declined, so that they can improve those proposals for the next submission. We do need to make sure that proposals are fairly assessed and based on merit. And these assessments, again, have to be free of unconscious biases and conflicts of interest. And so we need to manage conflicts of interest according to defined and published processes. Everyone needs to understand what a conflict of interest is. We need to know how to disclose potential conflicts of interest and how to manage them and resolve any potential conflicts of interest. Therefore, it's extremely necessary to have training both on conflicts of interest and on unconscious bias. We find that when we provide this training on unconscious bias, the potential biases become conscious, and therefore we can address them, things that reviewers might not have been aware of before the training. Merit review processes must be appropriate to the research area. Those who are funding more applied type of research need a process that would review it in a more applied sense. For an agency like NSF that funds basic research, we need to make sure that the process addresses the basic research principles. The merit review process also needs to consider the size and the complexity of the objectives within the research area, so you can see why the expertise of the reviewers is so important. We also need to make sure that we have this confidentiality in the merit review process. So the process needs to be treated with privacy by reviewers and organizations involved. We need to make sure that reviewers and staff do not share the contents of proposals and related data or any intellectual property or other documents with outside parties. This is essential to the merit review process so that proposers feel comfortable submitting their best ideas to the funding agency for review, and that those ideas are protected until the researchers are ready to make them public. Research conduct is the essence of the scientific process, and so we need to make sure that we address any potential misconduct as soon as possible. And therefore, integrity and ethics in research are essential, and we need to make sure of this so that we have society's trust in the scientific process and the science. If there's a lack of objectivity or a lack of integrity, both in how we select the research and the research itself, the practice of the research itself, we lose public trust. We also need to make sure, and this is something that we added in 2018, that we address inclusion in the review process itself. We need to include underrepresented groups, including women, early career researchers, members of all ethnicities. And this enhances the diversity and the innovative nature of our research. So we need to make sure that we track the success rates, what proposals we do accept, and track them as a function of gender, ethnicity, and time. And if there are any discrepancies, we need to address those. Regarding broader impacts, they do need to be considered where appropriate. The National Science Foundation does have broader impacts as one of its 2 merit criteria. Guidance on broader impacts criteria should be provided to all applicants and reviewers for the sake of transparency and so that they're clear on how broader impacts are going to be assessed. We also need to make sure that we address risk. We balance risk so that high risk and high reward proposals are also considered, as well as those that might be of lower risk. Again, it's about balance. And we should make sure that we include international reviewers where it is appropriate. That's an overview of the merit review principles from the Global Research Council perspective. As I said, they started in 2012. We revised them in 2018, and we find that they are useful to NSF as well as to our international partners around the globe. Of course, if there are any questions, I or any of the members of the executive support group that are part of the Global Research Council would be very happy to address them. Thank you very much for your time.
Hello, my name is Lizzie Gant and I work at Loughborough University in the UK. I also have the good fortune to chair the International Network of Research Management Societies, INORMS Research Evaluation Working Group. We are an international group of research managers representing 12 research management societies around the world, charged with exploring how we can ensure that research evaluation is meaningful, responsible and effective on the global stage. One of our work packages resulted in the development of a 5-stage process for evaluating research responsibly called SCOPE, which is an acronym, and I've been invited to provide a 5-minute overview of SCOPE to support the discussions at this important Global Research Council Responsible Research Assessment event. So where does SCOPE start? Well, it starts with what we value. What does this mean? Well, it sounds obvious, but too often we don't start our evaluations here. We often start our evaluations with what others value, for example, the World University Rankings. And you may have seen that one of our other outputs from the INORMS Research Evaluation Working Group was our University Ranker Ratings, launched very recently, which highlighted just how deficient the world rankers are when it comes to the things that matter to the HE community, such as good governance, transparency and rigour, with their worst performance levels on measuring what matters, which must lead us to think very critically about the use of any ranking for decision making. And of course, the other thing we do here is not to start with our values and work forwards, but to start with the data we have available to us and work backwards. This is called the streetlight effect, as illustrated by this cartoon. Where did you lose your wallet? In the park. So why are you looking here? Because this is where the street light is. Many evaluations rely on bibliometric data, not because the volume of publications or even their citedness is what they value, but because it is so readily available and so easy to use. Once we are clear on what we value, we need to consider the context, the C context for our evaluation. And I hear many arguments about which indicators are responsible and which are not, but we can't have that conversation without knowing the context, the why and the what in which the indicator is going to be used. And it's worth remembering that there are many reasons for evaluating, and this matrix lists 6 key purposes alongside various entities of different sizes and attempts to indicate what the associated impacts and therefore risks might be. So, for example, plotting the publication volume of one country against that of another for the sole purpose of understanding their relative production levels has very little impact on the countries under assessment. So we've labelled that green. However, any form of assessment at the level of the individual that results in reward, such as fellowships, has a high impact on those individuals and therefore carries a greater degree of risk. And of course, the other key context consideration is discipline. So an evaluation approach that works for folks in one discipline won't necessarily work for those in another, even if the evaluative purpose is the same. Once we have thought through what we value about the research activity we're measuring and the context, it's worth pausing before we launch into our options to consider whether we actually need to evaluate at all. And that might sound like an odd thing to say, but this is really with one eye on the increasing use of measuring to incentivise certain behaviours. And this is seen as a solution for getting people to engage with open access, for example. But if you're familiar with Brian Nosek's excellent research culture change pyramid, you may already be persuaded that we need to make things possible, easy and normative before we can start measuring and rewarding them, even if we do value them. But where we do evaluate, we should also always do so with the evaluated. How often do we co-design and co-interpret our evaluations with those we are evaluating? Evaluation is something we should do with people and not to people. Then we have O for options, and this is a reminder that we do have options. We don't have to reach for metrics all the time. So the important thing to consider here is whether your indicator is a suitable proxy for the thing that you are evaluating. And we think the rule of thumb here is that, generally speaking, quantitative measures are generally for quantifiable things, such as citations, publications, money, and qualitative measures are for qualifiable things, so excellence, value, impact. And we should be especially careful if using quantitative indicators as a proxy for qualitative things. So a highly cited candidate does not equal a highly suitable candidate. An applicant from a highly ranked institution does not equal a better applicant. And whilst it's easy to criticise quantitative indicators, we have to remember that whilst peer review is often held up as the gold standard of research evaluation, there is a lot of concern about peer review and a lot we don't understand about peer review, as the Global Research Council has itself recognised in its peer review guidance. Once options for evaluating have been considered, we think there is an important probe stage where 4 key questions need to be asked. 1, who does this discriminate against? 2, how might this approach be gained? 3, what might the unintended consequences of this approach be, both on research culture and ultimately on society itself? And 4, does the cost of measuring actually outweigh the benefit? And of course, when seeking to fairly evaluate a large number of applicants, the cost can be high. So how do we get that balance right? And the E of scope is then to run your evaluation and to evaluate your evaluation. So that was a very quick fly through. There's a lot more on our website if you're interested in that. And I'm happy to take any follow-up questions by email or Twitter. Thank you for listening.
Hello, my name is James Wilston. I'm based at the University of Sheffield and also at the Research on Research Institute, which is based in London at the Wellcome Trust. It's my task to share with you 2 experiments in responsible metrics, which I have been involved in recent years. I'll flash them up here. The first of these is the metric tide, which was a review that I and colleagues undertook for the UK funding system back in 2014-15. The second is a report for the European Commission called Next Generation Metrics, which was produced as one of a number of inputs to deliberations on open science and the design of the research funding system ahead of the move from Horizon 2020 to Horizon Europe. So I'm going to try and whiz through these in the 7 or 8 minutes I've got. The metric tide itself, how it then went forward to influence the design of the next UK Research Excellence Framework, the REF, the Forum for Responsible Research Metrics, which was another product of that review, and then the Next Generation Metrics report. It's worth stressing, I think, that the 2 projects I'm mentioning, the 2 initiatives, were heavily influenced by other activities going on at that time, and I think in turn fed through into some of those. So prior to the metric tide, a couple of years before that, DORA had been published, the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment, and Stephen Curry, who is now, of course, chair of DORA, was then a member of the metric tide group. And just a few months in May of the same year, in July, when Metric Tide was published, the Leiden Manifesto came out in Nature. And Paul Wouters from Leiden University was a member of the Metric Tide group, and also, of course, one of the authors of the Leiden Manifesto. So there was a lot of movement of people and ideas across and between these different initiatives, which I think is an important part of understanding what went on. The Metric Tide itself is 3 linked reports. I won't go through them now in time, but there's the main report, the blue one, the literature review, the brown one, and the green one, which is a correlation analysis of indicators relating to the scores from the 2014 Research Excellence Framework. There is also a book version, if you like things in a bound cover, but the reports are all open access and available online. The impetus for the Metric Tide was first and foremost the desire by UK policymakers, government funders, to look afresh at the design and operation of the Research Excellence Framework. It had just been through its first cycle as the REF. Previously, it was the Research Assessment Exercise, the RAE, and as is always the case, there was a desire to look at how it could be improved or tweaked in various ways. One of the options on the table was to move to a metric-based assessment system, so to do away with the peer review panels, which formed the backbone of the methods of assessment through the REF, and to replace these with something more automated. So we were partly looking at that question. The group, though, partly as a reflection of the quality of the people involved, decided to interpret its terms of reference more broadly. We had a very good group drawn from across the research system, different disciplines, research managers and others. And so we decided to look not only at the REF, but at the broader questions around the use and at times abuse of metrics and quantitative indicators in the management of research. And we did so in a comprehensive and I think transparent way. You can see some of the details here. We had a call for evidence. We ran lots and lots of events. We did the various methodological elements, literature review, etc., etc. And it all came to a conclusion in the spring-summer of 2015 with a full report that came out on the 9th of July 2015. I won't go through all of the conclusions in it because there isn't time, but suffice to say that we argued that peer review, of course, has its flaws, and we all experience those often through the review system. But notwithstanding those, when we're looking at large-scale research assessment exercises, particularly something like the REF, where there's quite a lot of public funding at stake, several £billion in each round, peer review, panel-based peer review particularly, commands greater support than any other method. So metrics, while they can be used judiciously and appropriately, and more easily in some disciplinary areas than others, should support but not supplant expert judgment. The reason for that is that inappropriate use of indicators, as we know from many contexts, can create perverse incentives, and people optimize their behavior in the pursuit of those proxies rather than aiming for things for the reasons they should. And that can lead to all sorts of unintended consequences in research systems, as we know. So particularly when you then fuel that with a large amount of public funding, as would be the case in the REF, we felt there were many new problems that would be created by an all-metric REF, even though there might be a few issues that would be made easier as well. There's a lot in the report about the importance of data infrastructure, and the need for that to be open, to be interoperable, and really to lay the foundations for future more intelligent and responsible uses of metrics and indicators over time. When it came to the REF itself, we argued that, particularly through the correlation analysis that we did, that individual metrics couldn't produce a like-for-like replacement for peer review. And when it came to the impact part of the REF, so in 2014, the REF had included for the first time impacts, societal, economic, etc. We felt here the indicators that were available were still too imperfect in various ways in their design, in their rigor, such that narrative case studies remained the best way of capturing the diversity and richness of what was going on. That's not to say some of those metrics don't have a value, have a purpose and a use. They do, but again, you couldn't rely on them to the extent that would be necessary to use them as the basis of allocating a significant chunk of a large research assessment exercise of this kind. So when it came to the next ref, we said that quantitative data should be made available to those disciplinary panels that want it, and they should use it in appropriate and guided ways, being made aware of its possibilities and its limitations. And the final thing we did in the report that I think is worth flagging is articulated and advocated this notion of responsible metrics, and this term came from the Metric Tide report, influenced by wider debates about responsible research and innovation. We tried to distill the more comprehensive set of points and principles in DORA, in Leiden Manifesto, to these 5 simpler bullet points you see here. The reason I did this was I felt, certainly myself and probably many others, struggle to remember more than 5 things. So we're trying in those to give at least the essence of what's involved in a responsible assessment system. So the Metric Tide report came out. In its narrow and original sort of objective vis-a-vis the ref, it was taken forward. There was then a larger review of the ref that was led by Lord Nicholas Stern, then President of the British Academy. He looked in detail at the ref in its entirety, not just at the metrics question, and published his review conclusions in 2016. And we continued sort of engaging with that process. We were very pleased by his recommendations, which included here in recommendation 4, panels should continue to assess on the basis of peer review. However, metrics should be provided to support panel members in their assessment, and panels should be transparent about their use. That was more or less word for word what we had also argued. So in a narrow sense, the Metric Tide served its purpose, but in a broader sense, it contributed to what was then a burgeoning and has continued to develop conversation and move towards more responsible approaches to measurement, but also to other aspects of research culture and research assessment. Another of the recommendations we made was for the creation of a UK forum for responsible research metrics, and that of course is up and running and is involved in the GRC conference, chaired now by Max Lew, the Vice Chancellor of the University of Surrey, and that acts for the UK system as a forum for discussion, for advocacy, for data gathering on these questions at a national system level. And I think it's important to emphasize that while the bigger sort of global statements and principles are of course vital and important, there are very often aspects of any given national system, or indeed any given institution, research institution, university, or research funder, where one needs to play through those broader principles in a more grounded and contextualized way. And that's what the forum tries to do for the UK system as a whole. And we've reviewed, as you can see there, progress on. This was 3 years on in 2018. We're now 5 years on. The other thing then that happened, we were approached, Paul Wouters, myself, and a few others, to undertake a similar sort of exercise, but now for the European Commission and for the early thinking that was going into the design of Horizon Europe, the next framework programme. And there was this whole raft of activity going on under the auspices of the Open Science Policy Platform that the Commission created, one strand of which was focused on metrics and indicators. And from that work, we produced this report, Next Generation Metrics, which came out in March 2017. And again, I won't go through the recommendations because of time, but you can see in the same way, this is taking the broader principles as set out in DORA, Leiden, etc., and connecting them and playing them through in the context of the design and operation of, in this case, a European framework programme. So that was well received, I think it's fair to say, by the Commission at the time, and went in with other aspects of the work of the Open Science Policy Platform to this more synthetic piece and contribution that they made to Horizon Europe deliberations. And I think, although we're still yet to see some of the final fruits of that in terms of the detail of how aspects of Horizon Europe will work, there's no question that the totality of work that happened under the Open Science Policy Platform has had an important impact on the design and orientation of European funding over the next period. So that is my brief presentation over. I've gone over. I said I'd do 8 minutes. It's now 12, but hopefully I've given you enough of a flavour. As I say, all of those reports are online, and we also profile them in the working paper that I and colleagues have produced ahead of this week's GRC conference, which you see there. I hope that the wider material in that document is useful, and that from these videos and from the case material there, you can build up a picture of how rich, how diverse, how busy this field has become in recent years. Certainly, I feel that at least some cheerful whistling, even in the midst of a global pandemic, is justified when we consider how far things have come. For sure, there's a long way to go, but we mustn't underestimate or undersell the benefits and fruits of slow but steady steps in the right direction. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Johan Roig. I'm the Executive Director of Coalition S, and today I will speak about responsible research assessment in the context of Coalition S and Plan S. Plan S is a set of 10 principles that is designed to transition academic publishing from subscription publishing to open access publishing, to full and immediate open access. Coalition S is the alliance of organizations that have pledged to align their policies with Plan S, and so as to transition the work of all of their researchers to open access. Coalition S is an organization consisting of 25 organizations, national European funders from Austria to the United Kingdom. The European Commission is on board with the Horizon Europe framework that will be carried out under conditions of Plan S. We have charitable foundations that are members of Coalition S. Wellcome Trust, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Howard Hughes Medical Institute, Templeton World Charity Foundations, and Aligning Science Across Parkinson's. We have a global dimension with the World Health Organization, and Jordan, Zambia, South Africa, and African Academy of Sciences are also represented. We coordinate action with various other organizations that work towards full and immediate open access, such as America, Cielo, African Open Science Platform, OA 2020, and have signed the Sao Paulo Statement. And we, of course, carry out coordinated action with Open Access 2020, the organization in Germany that works towards transformative agreements. And we also have coordinated action with the Confederation of Open Access Repositories. What are the principles that Plan S is based on? Well, the basic principle is that research results are a public good, and therefore they should be immediately available so as to accelerate science. That means no more paywall publications. That means also means that open access must be immediate. No embargo periods will be allowed of 6 or 12 months. Publication should be under a CC BY license and no copyright should be transferred. And we also are against the hybrid model of publication. Hybrid model of publication means that a journal in which some content is behind the paywall and other content is open access. That model has demonstrably failed to transition academic publishing to open access, and that's why we do no longer want to fund it. We also find that pricing, contracts, and publication fees should be fully transparent in the interest of openness, and that funders commit to support such publication fees instead of the authors. We do not believe that individual researchers should pay for open access fees. We have now multiple routes to open access compliance, from gold open access over green open access, depositing in the repository, to open access under transitional agreements. All forms of open access are agreeable to us, including diamond, of course, as well. We also have a principle 10, which is a commitment to assess research outputs according to their intrinsic merit, and not, specifically not the prestige of the publication channel or the publisher, the journal impact factor, which we believe is an imperfect measure of for measuring research quality, Also, very strictly quantitative metrics is something that we do not condone, in accordance, of course, with DORA, Leiden Manifesto, and the Hong Kong principles that have advocated measures in the same direction. So now, why is it important for Coalition S and Plan S to think about the assessment system? Well, open access and open science are currently not really part of the incentives and reward system for researchers. A recent study by EUA has found that 75% of institutions use quantitative publication measures and journal impact factor to evaluate research output, and 28% of institutions find open science and access important for research evaluation. That's relatively little. So clearly the system has to change. The reliance on quantitative metrics, journal impact factor, and publishing prestige has to stop, because it leads to researcher competition rather than to openness and collaboration and sharing. And it also favors the traditional academic publishing model and its unsustainable prices for publishing. This is because publishers believe that the prestige of a journal should be associated with very high prices, which is, of course, not a necessary relationship at all. So to achieve full and immediate open access, we need to change the incentive and reward system for researchers. That is crucial. Now, what has Coalition S done in this regard? We have put together a research assessment task and finish group, and this group shares best practices among organizations for research assessment with a view to aligning these. It also tries to identify priorities for Coalition S organizations to meet the commitment of Principle 10 for a new rewards and incentive system and evaluation system. It also establishes what Coalition S organizations may want to require of the institutions that they fund. Namely, Coalition S organizations might want to ask of organizations that they fund to also apply DORA principles in their evaluation of researchers, for instance. And of course, and that's why we're here today, is to advocate the importance of responsible metrics and responsible research evaluation at a global level, and to coordinate action with other organizations that try to do the same. To that effect, the Coalition S organizations have shared a number of practices, good practices that they have adopted in their organizations, and these should be seen as a basket from which other organizations can pick and choose what is most appropriate for them. So it should not be viewed as a checklist, but these include the following: the request to value a broader spectrum of outputs than just publications, data software, researcher training, for example, to discourage also applicants to grants from mentioning the journal impact factor in their CVs, and also to use narrative CVs, to ask applicants to list open access publications, to limit the number of outputs that are listed for evaluation. So we ask researchers to only list what they think are their best publications and why they think these are their best publications. And we also instruct and advise peer reviewers and evaluation panels on the best way to use metrics, responsible ways of using metrics, and to have attention for alternative metrics. So in conclusion, for Coalition S, open access must become part of the rewards and incentive system for researchers. This requires a full change in the current system of reliance on quantitative metric impact factors and prestige indicators. It also means that Coalition S organizations are committed to applying these new assessment practices in their own grant selection, and to harmonize these across organizations as we see as is required. And finally, Coalition S organizations will evaluate how they can influence the institutions that they fund to do the same. I would like to stop here, and if you need any, if you have any questions or need further explanation, I'm available via email or for a quick video chat. Thank you for your attention.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am Lydia Borrell-Damian. I'm the Secretary General of Science Europe. Science Europe is an organization representing research performing organizations and research funding organizations. And we have a coordinating role in the Global Research Council as coordinating the activities for the European region. I am very pleased to present to you today the Science Europe position statement and recommendations on research assessment processes. These are, of course, very important for the activity of research and innovation, all projects that are funded by our research funding and our research performing organizations. The research assessment processes shape many aspects of the research landscape and has a strong influence on how research is performed and disseminated. Our members view research assessment processes as an important quality assurance gateway for the creation of new knowledge, thus resulting in developments for society and the economy. We engaged in a study in 2019 and 2020 to understand the characteristics of the research processes that Science Europe organizations and beyond were using to assess projects and researchers' careers. We invited 44 organizations to participate, out of which 38 accepted to contribute, sharing their knowledge with us. Let me share with you 3 or 4 key findings. One of them being that despite the large diversity in types of research organizations that participated, many common practices were identified. In fact, we found out that 81% of organizations use qualitative assessment to grant projects or to perform career assessment exercises. Many common challenges, as I said, were identified, and these included the continual need to address bias and discrimination. In fact, 82% of organizations do scrutinize any form of bias, although only 31% or take care of ethnicity conditions. And the challenge of balancing the cost and efficiency of assessment processes without compromising the quality of assessment. Also, we identify that these organizations were conducting some tests and pilots on certain programs to test novel approaches to assessment process that have to assessment process, as I said, and to see how or what adaptations to the current criteria they should be made to update the those research assessment processes. In fact, we took stock of 36% of the participant organizations that have some sort of pilot test for the reform or to adaptation of research assessment processes. I will now move quickly to the policy recommendations that were developed by Science Europe in close consultation with our membership, as well as with external stakeholders, including researchers organizations, and other important scientific organizations. There are a number of recommendations clustered around 7 areas. Let me highlight here for you today the need for more transparency, to make the process very transparent, the need to broaden the pool of reviewers, as there is a tendency to concentrate the review of these projects into a reduced number of reviewers, therefore the need to enlarge that, especially with young researchers. And the third recommendation I would like to highlight here with you is the progressive attention to qualitative assessment next to countable indicators. The recommendations that you can find in our report, you have a photo of the report and the link to it, represent a consensus position among Science Europe members on the current state of assessment process. We, however, are very conscious that there is more action needed in this field, and importantly, more collective action is needed. We have a whole series of examples that have collected through this project, which will be released during this week, and I hope that you will be able to take account of them through our social media. And I would just like to finish my presentation by saying that we are now undertaking a next step, what we call the second phase, which is undertaking a project that will look at what are the perspectives for the evolution of the research culture and how the research assessment processes and criteria should be adapted to reflect the changes in the research culture. And with this, I would like to end my presentation and wish you a very fruitful week ahead of us. Thank you very much for your attention.
This presentation concerns the Hong Kong principles for assessing researchers with a view to foster research integrity. Assessing researchers happens in many occasions, like grant applications, fulfilling of vacancies, promotion decisions, decisions about tenure and rewards. My main message will be that we should reward responsible research practices and should avoid perverse incentives. There is specifically a view to not merely rely on bibliometric indicators. The visitors of this virtual conference will know that that has been criticized quite widely. Counting citations, counting publications and their derivatives, like you have the impact factor or the Heath factor. There's not that much wrong with counting publications and citations, but it's wrong to only count citations and publications, because that sends the message that these are the only things that matter, and that of course is not the case. And that leads to a dilemma for researchers. Researchers, in essence, need to make a decision to do what is good for truth finding and trust in research on the one hand, and what is good for their career on the other hand. Often these go in the same directions, but not always. And when you have perverse incentives in the assessment procedures, they're pulling researchers in wrong directions, and we believe that needs to be avoided. Investigators, they have a moral compass, and you see that compass over here, and it's driven by the virtuousness of that individual, of course, but also by the research climate in the lab. That is important, because we are strongly influenced by the social environment in which we function. And then there is that domain of the incentives that can be adequate and that can be perverse. This article that has been published in Nature a few weeks ago, it's coming out of a European project called SOPs for RI. And in this article, we outline 3 areas and 9 topics and a bunch of actions that are important things that research institutions can and indeed also should do to promote research integrity. And I'll allude to this in this presentation only to one of them, and that is ensure fair assessment procedures. And that is the domain of the Hong Kong principles. These Hong Kong principles are named after the city of Hong Kong, because that is where the 6th World Conference on Research Integrity was. Next to me, you see the announcement of the 7th that will be in Cape Town in the year after next year. And the 6th conference in Hong Kong, there we made a decision together about these principles, and we published them in PLOS Biology, and this is the reference. These are the principles. Assess responsible research practices. Value complete reporting. Number 3, reward the practice of open science. Acknowledge a broad range of research activities. And the last one, recognize other tasks like peer review and mentoring. This is much broader than only counting citations and publications. And that is exactly how it should be, we believe. In our paper, we give numerous examples, and many of these examples boil down to the doctrine, if you want, of open science, especially open data, open methods, open codes or open resources, and data handling according to the FAIR principles. Findable, accessible, interoperable, and reproducible. That is the idea. I cannot go through them all in a short presentation, but I want to allude to one aspect, and that is pre-registration in the specific form of registered reports. We believe from the Hong Kong principles that when people engage in that, and that's possible now only by just 265 journals, so it's early adoption phase, it will be an excellent intervention to lower selective reporting. Please have a look. The idea is you submit an introduction and a method paragraph, and then you start collecting data after your submission is accepted for publication. So journals make the decision before knowing what the results are, because there are no results. So they cannot be distracted by the results of your study. They need to rely on whether it's a relevant question and whether the methods are sound. And when this decision is made, the bonus is that you can still use review methodological remarks from the reviews to improve your study. Then you start collecting your data, and when it's all done, you write your report. It is checked whether you did what you promised, and then it is published. Away goes selective reporting and publication bias. And here is what you see. This is a comparison of registered reports and traditional literature. It's the first comparison that is made on registered reports. Registered reports are negative in about 60% of the publications, while matched controls from the traditional literature, they are in the range of only 10 to 15% negative findings. And that's a huge difference. It's a big leap forward towards unbiased, full complication of all your results. And we believe that this is an important way to go. Culture is important. I alluded to that already. And you should reward behavior when you assess investigators that improves the culture. And there is still something rather wrong with the culture. Wellcome Trust investigated it earlier this year in this report. These are two papers from our study in Amsterdam, where we questioned and focus group interviewed all Amsterdam researchers on their opinions on the climate and the culture in which they have to function. And yes, there is room for improvement. And yes, it's hard work to make the improvement. And yes, we need to reward it when we assess investigators. This is part of the Hong Kong Principles paper. It's a table of neat indicators for responsible research practices. You can just have a look at it if you want, and it operationalizes what we expect in CV, in narratives that are being used to assess investigators in the future. When you like the Hong Kong Principles, please endorse them on our website. You can do that either as an individual or an institution. Many of the materials are there on the website. Please have a look. This video will also be uploaded on the website, and the PowerPoint presentation of it. Use it when you like it. It's completely open for everyone to use. And please, let's together improve the way researchers are assessed, and which is completely compatible to the DORA principles and also the Leiden Manifesto principles. And I appreciate our collaboration in this. If you're interested in this research on research integrity, and you grasp the core message again, that we should do it responsibly and avoid perverse incentives and not rely on bibliometric indicators, please come to our next conference in Cape Town. Here are the websites where you can find information on it. You're completely open to visit us also during the web-based seminar in June next year. I thank you very much for your attention.
Hello, everybody. It is a pleasure to participate in this pre-conference Frameworks Use Responsible Assessment. My name is Laura Robelli, and I am the coordinator of the Latin American Forum for Research Assessment, FOLEC in Spanish, from CLACSO. We are very grateful to the Global Research Council for this invitation, and please let me share with you a brief presentation of FOLEC. FOLEC is an initiative from Latin America and the Global South for expanding responsible research assessment methodologies and consolidating open science practices. FOLEC was created 2 years ago, but it was in 2019 in Mexico City, where the first forum was organized by CLACSO and CONACYT, the Mexican National Council of Science and Technology. In 2020, 2 other regional consultations were made with specialists in research assessment and directors of CLACSO member centers. 300 people and 75 representatives participated respectively. In October 2020, another meeting occurred with the participation of international research councils and specialists to discuss 3 documents produced in the framework of FOLEC on research assessment in our region. At present, FOLEC has more than 30 allied research funding agencies, organizations, and institutions of science, technology, and higher education from the Global South and North participating. Our work is based on a multi-scale strategy where policies, institutional practices, researchers' careers, and cultural beliefs are taken into consideration to promote a comprehensive research assessment transformation in our region. Also, FOLEC contributes to engage research assessment practices with the 17 objectives of sustainability and development of the Agenda 2020 by the United Nations. In that sense, in 2019, that agenda was reinforced by the organization and thus renewed a call to strengthen the link between high-quality, mission-oriented research to improve policy-relevant efforts for global sustainability and their contribution to solving social and environmental problems and public engagement. To achieve these objectives, the FOLEC discusses and promotes regional assessment methodologies to tackle these problems in the Global South, and recently dealing with big critical issues such as COVID-19 pandemic, facing the challenge of supporting science that is both high quality and relevant to our nations. In that scenario, international and regional declarations and studies, academic studies, have warned that research assessment policies built on incentives or indicators based on the impact factor of international indexed journals limit the local autonomy of research agendas. Also discourage good open access practices and discourages research in interaction with society through its decontextualization and dereferencing. In that sense, and to cope with the 17 goals from sustainability and development, the FOLEC established some principles and proposals to share with the regional and international community. Among them, we would like to recover science with social relevance and quality, with inclusion of local knowledge and participation for an inclusive perspective and plurality of approaches. Also, transparency and participation in research assessment processes, to value diverse cultures, multiple knowledges, and interdisciplinary dialogues seeking to recognize the knowledge of indigenous and Afro-descendant peoples in the region, guaranteeing women representation in assessment instances and processes in a minimum of parity and in the research priorities under topics. also to promote the creation and use of a diversity of databases that reflect both the production disseminated in international repositories as well as in regional and national databases. Last, promoting an eco-diversity in social sciences and humanities as regards publications and also evaluation criteria in our systems, and recover the value of this eco-diversity in epistemological terms. From our experience and perspective as a network of more than 700 research institutions in 52 countries, the Global South has a unique opportunity to address those concerns by reviewing evaluation procedures to adapt them to open science practices. At FOLEC, we have been active in the discussions about recommendations to be issued to UNESCO and consider that rewarding open science good practices when assessing projects, institutions, and careers could contribute to extend collaboration with societal actors beyond the scientific community. Different forms of knowledge creation and communication supporting collaborative publishing models with no article processing charges or book processing charges, diversify information technology, infrastructure for open science, platforms for exchange and co-creation of knowledge between scientists and society, and community-based monitoring and information systems, among other principles. From FOLEC, from CLACSO, we are pleased to participate in this pre-conference and available to collaborate with the Global Research Council on responsible research quality metrics and progressive and grounded evaluation methodologies in order to strengthen research systems and knowledge worldwide practices in the transition to open science. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Sarah de Rijker. I am the director of the Center for Science and Technology Studies at Leiden University in the Netherlands, and I'm also co-chair of the Research on Research Institute. And I'm presenting to you now in my capacity as one of the co-authors of the Leiden Manifesto for Research Metrics, which was published in 2015 in Nature. And it's not only a Nature article, but it's also a website where you can find also the manifesto translated into 25 languages by now. The manifesto is also a video, which I will show you in a second. And we try to maintain a blog on the website as well to also facilitate ongoing discussion on this very important topic. Now, some context, because around the time that we published the Leiden Manifesto in 2015, there were a number of very high-profile initiatives that started addressing the need for changes in the governance of science, and I've included a couple of those initiatives on the slide here. So you see the Metric Tide, you see DORA, you see the Reward Alliance, and you see, for instance, the UK Responsible Metrics initiatives, and these are only a couple of examples that came to mind. Now, the Leiden Manifesto was co-authored by a group of science metricians and science policy experts. And as I said, it set out 10 principles for the use of metrics in research evaluation. And it was born out of a growing realization in the science and metrics community of the need to offer clear guidance to end users of bibliometrics in research evaluation. And we first presented the principles, or a draft actually of the principles, at a conference in 2014 in a special session in which we brought together both scientometric experts as well as representatives of funding agencies, policymakers, and opinion leaders on the role of metrics in research assessment, and to discuss the extent to which moving towards clearer maybe standardized guidelines over usage and consultancy could be achieved in the first place, both technically, whether we could come to an agreement, but also strategically. And then what the guidelines, if we all agreed, should look like concretely. Now, not long before that conference, the DORA declaration about the journal impact factor had brought possible misuses of metrics really further to the center of attention. And from that conference in 2014, we further developed the piece in collaboration with one of the Nature editors, and that went through multiple iterations into this final Nature version that is now out there. And I would now like to show you the video version of the manifesto, which we mounted on Vimeo. And the video lays out quite nicely, I think, the 10 principles of our statement, and does so actually in a more attractive way than I would be able to pull off with slides.
More and more, data is used to govern science. Services, databases, and metrics have proliferated. As scientometricians, we have watched with alarm, aware that too many instances fall far short. So we created a roadmap to guide researchers and evaluators toward the best practices in research assessment. 1. Use quantitative evaluation to support, not substitute for, expert assessment. Quantitative metrics can strengthen peer review because making judgments about colleagues is difficult without a range of relevant information. But indicators don't substitute for informed judgment. 2. Measure performance in accordance with the research missions of the institution. Research for advancing the frontiers of academic knowledge differ from research focused on delivering solutions to societal problems. No single evaluation model applies to all contexts. Instead, review should either be based on academic notions of excellence or the benefit to policy, industry, or the public. 3. Protect excellence in locally relevant research. In many parts of the world, research excellence is equated with English language publication. Metrics based on high-quality, non-English literature would serve to identify and reward excellence in locally relevant research. 4. Keep data collection and analytical processes open, transparent, and simple. Databases used in evaluation should be constructed according to clearly stated rules set before the research has been completed, until recently a common practice. In 2010, public debate on the technical properties of an important indicator led to a revision in the calculation of this indicator. Recent commercial entrants should be held to these standards. No one should accept black box evaluation machines. 5. Allow those evaluated to verify data and analysis. To ensure data quality, all researchers included in bibliometric studies should be able to check that their outputs have been correctly identified. Accurate, high-quality data take time and money to collate and process. Budget for it. 6. Account for variation by field in publication and citation practices. In humanities, there are few citations and they accumulate slowly. In biomedical sciences, there are many citations accumulating quickly. Citation rates vary by field. Normalized indicators are required, and the most robust normalization method is based on percentiles, number of top papers in the top 1% in a field, for example. 7. Assess individual researchers using qualitative judgment of their portfolio. Relying on one number, even the H-index is a one-dimensional view. Reading and judging a researcher's work gives the full picture. 8. Avoid misplaced concreteness and false precision. The journal impact factor is published to 3 decimal places to avoid ties. However, given the conceptual ambiguity and random variability of citation counts, it makes no sense to distinguish between journals based on very small impact factor differences. Avoid false precision. Only 1 decimal is warranted. 9. Recognize systemic effects of assessment and indicators. Indicators establish incentives. People respond, and the system changes. Anticipate these effects. This means that a suite of indicators is always preferable. A single one will invite gaming and goal displacement. 10. Scrutinize indicators regularly and update them. Research missions and assessment goals shift over time, and the research system itself co-evolves. Once useful metrics become inadequate, new ones emerge. Indicator systems have to be reviewed and updated. Abiding by these principles, decision-making about science can be based on high-quality processes, informed by the highest quality data. Go online to read the full manifesto.
I would like to conclude this presentation by giving you some examples of the impact that the Leiden Manifesto has had, and the relevance that it has had, I think, globally. And one of those examples, I guess, of global relevance of the manifesto is safe to say, is shown by the number of translations that the manifesto now has. So volunteers from different parts of the world have by now translated the manifesto into 25 languages, from Chinese and Spanish and French to Persian, Russian, Indonesian, Turkish, and we're extremely grateful for all the volunteers that have made that possible. And like the video, the translations are also mounted on the website that you see here on the slide as well, leidenmanifesto.org, and that website is also visited quite regularly, seen over, I think, by over 200 unique visitors every day. Another form of impact was that in 2016, the manifesto received the Simon Award of the European Association for the Study of Science and Technology, and that is an award for collaborative promotion of public interaction with science and technology. And the award citation noted that the Leiden Manifesto is an initiative to engage with the rise of metrics-based or metrics-based research assessment, I should say, by articulating a set of principles which draw on the insights of science and technology studies on the nature of knowledge. A recent example in the context of this conference, I think very relevant, of funder policy impact that I also want to close off with is that in July of this year, Science Europe published a position statement and recommendations on research assessment processes. And as you know, with 37 member organizations from 27 countries, Science Europe is the association for public funders of scientific research in Europe. And that position statement was published after a comprehensive study of current funder policies and practices have been completed, and that was done alongside a consultation process with members. And in the position paper, the Leiden Manifesto is explicitly mentioned as one of the key building blocks for the Science Europe recommendations to guide evaluation and assessment processes. And I've listed some of these recommendations on the final slide. So you see here a recommendation that says that research assessment processes must be clear and transparent, that research organizations should monitor and regularly evaluate the robustness of their assessment processes and share best practices to foster mutual learning. That research organizations should also publicly demonstrate and continually evaluate how they address bias, discrimination, and unfair treatment in assessment processes. That research organizations should streamline assessment processes to reduce the burden on reviewers and applicants. That research assessments should focus on the substance and content of applications. And finally, that research organizations should consider implementing novel assessment techniques. Now that concludes my contribution for the conference. I would like to thank you very much for your attention, and I hope you will enjoy the rest of the conference.